I think it's very important, especially in the modern world, for us to go back into the ancient Christian experience and understand how they viewed Christmas. And what was their evidence for December 25th? What was their evidence for the time of year in which they celebrated the coming of Jesus, the coming of incarnate Christ? There's been a modern perception that the Emperor Constantine invented Christmas and made December 25th the celebration for Christmas. There's the old idea that the Christians were using the Saturnalia, which is an old winter celebration, a pagan winter celebration that the Christians were trying to associate with that. There's really no evidence of that. It is really an interesting thing that people are trying to make Christmas into a pagan celebration when it wasn't there. And my question is always, why would the Christians who are being persecuted by the pagans use dates that are pagan and not Christian? The early Christians were not particularly interested, especially in this era of persecution, of using pagan dates and pagan celebration. The idea that December 25th was invented by Constantine as the birth date of Christianity really only begins around the 1600s and 1700s AD, at an age influenced by the Enlightenment, in which there is a lot of emphasis on trying to undermine kind of the solid foundations of Christianity and Christian faith. So the question is, how do we end up December 25th as the dates that the Christians are using? Well, it actually goes back to the Gospel of Luke with Zechariah, who is in the temple and he's working as a priest. And the angel announces to him, that he and Elizabeth are going to have a child, and he doesn't believe it. And so he's struck mute. When we're talking about the conception of Jesus and the Annunciation to Mary as it's described in the Gospel of Luke, it says that she's to go to visit her relative Elizabeth, and that Elizabeth had been pregnant for 6 months. So when Mary goes to see Elizabeth is pregnant already for 6 months. And what would be 6 months from March 25th? It would be in September sometime, which is the time of either Rosh Hashanah or the Day of Atonement, celebrations that would have put a man like Zechariah, a priest, in the temple. And so this is what the early church is working with as far as their dating of Jesus' conception, 6 months after these dates, somewhere around the 20th to the 25th in September. After that, March would be the date. And then they trace it from March 25th to December 25th. And so when you look at the history of the early church and you look at the celebration of Christmas, actually our first indications that Christmas was being celebrated on December 25th goes back to a guy named Hippolytus, a couple of other people in that time, Julius Africanus, and a couple of calendars from that age that shows that Christmas was actually being celebrated either on December 25th or on March 25th, 9 months earlier. And this is really important for us to understand that the early Christians were identifying dates already for either the conception of Jesus or his birth. And both of them were very important to the early Christians because it has to do with incarnate God and God becoming incarnate through Mary, becoming a man. Now, there are a couple of interesting things that happened down through the history of the early Christians. We have some evidence that they're already beginning to celebrate his birth or his conception. There is a moment in the 270s when the Emperor Aurelian announces that December 25th is the celebration of a god called Sol Invictus, who is the invincible sun. It's a solar worship, worship of the sun Sol Invictus has kind of come on and off the radar in Rome for a long time. And here the Emperor Aurelian is making this a celebration. And so there's been a lot of debate among ancient historians as to why he's doing this, why he's making this date a particular date. And later on in the modern world, scholars said, well, what he's doing is he's establishing the date of Christmas. That's what he's doing. And so if they don't say it's Constantine, they'll go back earlier to Aurelian. And what I think is going on actually is that Aurelian, who is noticing a large growth in Christianity, and by the 270s, you're probably looking at about 30% of the population now becoming Christian. What I think he's doing is actually trying to take December 25th and make it pagan, make it the worship of Sol Invictus. Now, there's another stream of thought that he actually is trying to bring together some unity with the Christians and use the same date that the Christians are using. Quite often also there's an association of that solar worship, of that worship of Sol Invictus with Jesus. And if we look back at Scripture, the Christians have used kind of solar imagery in relation to Jesus for a long time. You look at the Gospel of John, the light comes into the world. A couple of points in which you have that mentioned. But even earlier in Malachi chapter 4, there is this prophecy that the Messiah will be the Sun, S-U-N, of righteousness. The sun come into the world, the light come into the world. And so if we want to associate with Aurelian, maybe what he's trying to do is bring together paganism with Christianity somehow. There might be an openness to using solar imagery there on both sides. It's hard to tell. But really, in the end, it begins with a guy named Hippolytus, a number of writers in the early church who identify these dates based upon the Gospel of Luke. Products of the Enlightenment and products of the modern age, want to move away from the whole idea that we have a connection with these strong Christian convictions in the past. There is a desire to move away from that and just seeing it as more or less a winter celebration rather than something connected with the arrival of incarnate God. God came into the world at a specific time and place in the Roman Empire. And if God comes into the world in this way, in a specific time and place, then you should have an idea calendrically, of when that is. When during the year do you remember that and celebrate that?